we got it down. Okay, it is down. The district attorney will file charges in the Rust shooting. The first judicial district attorney, Mary Carmack Altweiss, is announcing that there will be charges here. And actor-producer Alec Baldwin and armorer Hannah Gutierrez-Reed will each be charged with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter in the death of Halyna Hutchins on the film's Santa Fe County set. Assistant Director David Halls has signed a plea agreement for the charge of negligent use of a deadly weapon. The terms include a suspended sentence and 6 months of probation. A copy of the plea will be made available later. No charges will be filed against the non-fatal shooting of Rust director Joel Souza. So then it goes on to say, after the evidence was reviewed, they came to this conclusion. And one of the quotes from the district attorney is, "On my watch, no one is above the law and everybody deserves justice." Baldwin and Gutierrez-Reed will be charged in the alternative with the 2 counts of manslaughter, meaning that a jury would decide not simply if they were guilty, but under which definition of involuntary manslaughter they were guilty. So push play, I guess, Janley. This is now the beginning of the next phase in this. Alec Baldwin will, along with Hannah Gutierrez, charged with involuntary manslaughter, and which means he will be heading back to New Mexico to answer these charges.
Yeah, Ted, that is revealing because this charge, involuntary manslaughter, is not an intent charge. So that's saying something that these prosecutors and investigators believe that this was not an intentional act, which has been what they've said all along. And just for example, involuntary manslaughter in New Mexico is when the defendant engages in lawful but dangerous behavior without exercising due caution and circumspection. It's a 4th-degree felony, so it's still a felony there in the state of New Mexico, but it's punishable by up to 18 months and, of course, a fine as well. But, you know, this is an example of that, where it wasn't intended, but there's some due care that was overlooked before this act was conducted that resulted in the death of a human being here. And it is interesting that the same charge is for Baldwin and for Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that, Ted.
Yeah, absolutely. And the charge with the same thing. As I read on in this press release, they sort of distinguish between the 2 charges for involuntary manslaughter. The first charge can be referred to simply as involuntary manslaughter. For this charge to be proved, there must be underlying negligence under New Mexico law. And then the other charge is involuntary manslaughter in the commission of a lawful act, meaning that you were doing something lawful, but it requires proof that there was more than simple negligence involved in a death. It is a 4th-degree felony, punishment up to 18 months, as you just said, and a $5,000 fine. And it's one thing to charge, it's another thing to get a conviction, and it'll be interesting to see because they've already entered into a plea deal with Dave Halls, who handled that gun as well, and you wonder if this deal was offered to Hannah Gutierrez and Alec Baldwin or just Dave Halls. One would think that all three names would have been on this document, but we're only seeing 2 here because of the plea deal.
Exactly, and in our experience, sometimes we see the authorities, prosecutors, reaching out to the attorneys of those before it's public, right? Is giving them notice that they are going to charge them, and considering that, did they have an opportunity? Did Alec Baldwin, did Hannah Gutierrez-Reed have an opportunity to discuss this with their attorneys ahead of this public announcement, as Halls may have had to enter some sort of agreement or plea deal? That would be interesting to find out in this as well. And we've seen that before in anticipation of the announcement of a charge to kind of streamline the process of what happens next, turning that person in after they are, they don't have to be arrested publicly. They can just turn in with their attorney and something's worked out. So I would be interested to hear if that was something that the DA's office did here. And that resulted in a plea deal for at least one of these defendants.
Yeah, Chrisanne Hall is still with us. C.K. Hoffler also joining us, criminal defense attorney in Atlanta. Chrisanne is in Tampa, Florida. Your reaction, Chrisanne, to you first on the decision, the breaking news this hour, Alec Baldwin charged with 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter.
Well, you know, as we mentioned before the break, that was always a possibility. And because involuntary manslaughter in the state of New Mexico, you know, first off, is a crime of no intent. And it requires that the prosecutor prove that there was, this was done without circumspection, without due caution. And you'd wondered about the plea deal offered to Alec Baldwin. And I would just simply submit that if I were Alec Baldwin's attorney, I'm not sure about Hannah. If Hannah, I might have actually considered the plea deal. But if I were Alec Baldwin, I might take this as far as I can go, because the prosecutor is going to have to prove that Alec Baldwin had a duty of care. And I think as Alec Baldwin's attorney, I would simply say, you know, as the actor, I accept the equipment as it comes to me. I don't have a duty of care. But then you also have the complicating element of him being the executive producer. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered here.
CK, your reaction.
Good morning, Ted. My reaction is Alec Baldwin was lucky that they were not able to formulate any intent. Of course, we knew this was unintentional, and and it's important that they were not able to discover any evidence that would point to any intentional acts. But I think Alec Baldwin should have considered a plea deal, because I think it's, and again, I'm looking at this, of course, through a civil lens, but also a criminal lens. I think without a question, they're going to be able to establish negligence. There's a lot of evidence and testimony that will be coming forward, I believe, that will point to the gross negligence on the set. Of course he had a duty. He was the executive producer. The buck stopped with him. He was going to make a lot of money from this movie. And I might mention that Alec Baldwin's temperament is something that will be considered. He's not the most likable person. And so I think all of that will be taken into consideration when a jury of his peers in New Mexico looks at this evidence and sees and analyzes this tragedy. I think it's not going to be difficult for the prosecutors to make out a strong case of gross negligence, not just ordinary negligence, but gross negligence. Because based on what I've seen, what I've read, the set was a hot mess. And Alec Baldwin knew about some of these deficiencies, and yet he continued. And they can make out a compelling case that the buck stops with him, and he saw money, profits, and dollars, and he put that before people. It's unconscionable that some of the security measures were not taken to prevent this from happening. Simply unconscionable.
Janley, this was forecasted a bit in the months leading up to this, in that the prosecutors basically asked for money from the state of New Mexico because they were anticipating a high-profile case. Even mentioned Alec Baldwin, and they received that money. The special prosecutor that was brought on, Andrea Reed, she did make a statement today saying if any one of these 3 people, Alec Baldwin, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, or David Halls, had done their job, Halyna Hutchins would be alive today. It is that simple. Chanley, what is next then? I guess they're going to file formally by the end of the month.
Right. It says they're going to file formally by the end of the month. The defendants will receive a summons. They'll have to appear, of course, on that summons. They'll make a first appearance. And interesting, Ted, this was filed or will be filed by complaint. So this goes on to talk about how they don't, grand juries in New Mexico are only for special circumstances. So that means we will have a preliminary hearing. We will learn more evidence and details as to why the prosecutors felt this charge was necessary. But again, that will be typically within 60 days after the charge is being filed. So we'll have to wait a few months for that, but that is what's next for Alec Baldwin and Hannah Gutierrez.